So this is this week's question and answer session. Hope everyone is uh, doing okay. Some good questions asked this week. So let's get right going. So the first question is how Obama's anti-war position during the campaign affected his foreign policy during the presidency. And a related question is how do politicians get reelected when they don't stay true to the policies? And the reason that there is this linkage between the two is, remember, Obama campaigns on it is somewhat of a nuanced platform, but the core foreign policy aspect of Obama's campaign is this idea that he opposed the war in Iraq from the start, and so anti-war voters in particular are excited by Obama. They flock to his support in the primary. As president, though, he has a much more erratic record, and I think his most controversial element is this drone program. He becomes very confident in using drones, especially in Yemen and in the northern sections of Pakistan. And it's quite true that in both Yemen and in northern Pakistan, the United States was facing threat from Al-Qaeda in Pakistan and from an Al-Qaeda affiliate in Yemen. But the United States had never declared war on either Pakistan or Yemen. And Obama's authority for these acts, which, as you can see from the piece, this is from a British investigative report, did create civilian casualties, was never quite explained. So how was he reelected in 2012? We'll see more about this this coming week. But he runs against his opponent and then sort of demonizes his opponent, Mitt Romney. It's the same strategy that Trump is going to try this year, try to demonize Biden. And the country had largely moved beyond these foreign policy disputes. But it is the gap between the rhetoric on foreign policy issues by Obama in the 2008 campaign and what we actually saw from Obama's foreign policies between 2009 and 2016 was quite stark. Next question is about the Palin pick for McCain. It almost felt like she wasn't ever vetted, as I'll mention in a second. She wasn't, and they asked whether this was deliberate to make women look weak. First of all, another taste of McCain. These are of Palin. These are a couple of other clips from her disastrous rounds of interviews.
We're never going to spend $3 million again to study the DNA of bears in Montana.
Governor, this year, $1 million for researching the genetics of harbor seals, money to study the mating habits of crabs. Isn't that exactly the kind of thing that John McCain is objecting to?
Those requests through our research divisions and our wildlife departments and our universities did come through that system, but wanting it to be in the light of day, not behind closed doors with lobbyists making deals with Congress.
When you were a mayor of Wasilla, you hired a very prominent lobbyist to get Wasilla money.
We did. We paid $30,000 for a lobbyist who was in D.C. because we're thousands and thousands of miles away from D.C.
What newspapers and magazines did you regularly read before you were tapped for this to stay informed and to understand the world?
I've read most of them, again, with a great appreciation for the press, for the media.
Like what one specifically? I'm curious that you...
all of them, any of them that have been in front of me over all these years.
She was a voracious reader. So yes, it's given her performance, I suppose it's possible to say this has to have been a plot. The goal was just to make to discredit female politicians in general. In reality, this wasn't the case, and there were a couple of things that were going on. The first, Palin was an extraordinarily popular governor. She had taken over she had defeated in the 2006 Republican primary the incumbent governor, ironically the father of current Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski, who had all kinds of ethical issues during his term as a governor. part caused by the fact that he appointed his daughter to the U.S. Senate when he resigned his seat. But Palin worked with Democrats. She seemed relatively popular. And the McCain strategy in 2008 was to sort of shake up the race with his vice presidential nominee. The first approach was to go to Lieberman, but that was killed by the Republican National Committee. So then he went to Palin. But to shake up the race, he needed a surprise, and so his campaign team, which very, very poorly served him in this circumstance, decided that they wouldn't aggressively vet the candidates because they just assumed, well, if you have elected office, you probably don't have too many skeletons in your closet. They wanted the pick to really be a surprise, and they looked at Palin. They saw that she had phenomenal approval ratings. Her approval ratings were in the 70s, 80% in 2007 and early 2008. So they figured if she's that popular, she must really be a good governor. She had good press coverage in Alaska. She had a young, attractive family. And they talked to her a couple of times, and she seemed on screen, but they didn't really ask her tough questions. She and critically here, she paired with McCain in one important way. McCain campaigned in 2008 as the maverick, the advocate of campaign finance reform. This is the guy who had occasionally toggled with George W. Bush. Palin had, at least briefly, she quickly abandons this, taken on the oil industry in Alaska. So the idea was that she was a maverick. Of course, once she's chosen, it's clear just how incredibly disastrous a pick this was. That you have someone who's not terribly bright on public policy issues, who personalizes disputes, who is running her own campaign against the McCain message. But none of that was immediately apparent at the time, and this was sort of a Hail Mary by the McCain team. They were behind. They thought they'd shake the race up. They did shake the race up, but not in the way that they had anticipated. Question on the financial crisis of 2008 and about the consequences of the choice to bail out the banks, and also a healthcare bill, which I'll talk about next. This is the stock market chart from late 2008. So you can see this just incredible plunge in early October of 2008 after Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, and after it appeared as if a significant number of Wall Street firms might crash. And what W. Bush is told by his Treasury Secretary, Hank Paulson, and Obama is brought into these discussions, and he agrees with it, is that if the government does not bail out the big banks, the result will be a liquidity crisis. These banks will just collapse, money will cease to circulate, and there'll be a worldwide economic depression. And in retrospect, that guidance was probably true. If the United States if the U.S. government had not aggressively acted in October of 2008, the economic consequences would have been catastrophic. The problem with this for W and then eventually for Obama as well is that there are other people harmed by the 2008 crash, and obviously millions of Americans lose their jobs. But one of the most clearly obvious group of people who are harmed by this are new-ish homeowners, the people who had obtained some of these mortgages that caused the financial crisis, and suddenly have homes that they might have put, say, a $10,000 down payment for, and maybe paid $30,000 or $40,000 in mortgage payments over the previous 2 or 3 years. But suddenly they might have lost their jobs, they might have had other credit issues, and they no longer can pay their mortgages. They aren't bailed out. The banks are. They're not bailed out in part because of the Tea Party movement. And this broader political sense of why should homeowners who have paid all their bills have to bail out homeowners who haven't paid all their bills? take one position on this or the other. But the calculation ultimately made is that while on the government's part, is that while it's unfortunate that these homeowners lost their homes, it will not crash the economy. They'll just sell their homes on the market, oftentimes at a loss, but they'll sell them. Whereas if the banks had crashed, it would have destroyed the economy. And this is an example. W. Bush is not a president who does a lot of things right in terms of his performance, but you can make a pretty good argument here that he chooses the country's interest over political interests. I mean, the political interests were not to bail out the big banks because they're not a politically appealing group, to put it mildly. Here's the question on the healthcare law. So, what arguments did Obamacare against Obamacare opponents? What arguments against Obamacare did opponents have? Or in effect, was it just partisanship? Given that to a certain extent the argument was just this reflexive claims against a government takeover that that hadn't been raised in previous instances, or mirrored the kind of very broad arguments against Medicare and Medicaid. I do think partisanship was a significant aspect of it, but there were two other areas that were substantively critical to the opposition. The first, Obama is, you could make a case that Obama is the most conservative president since Eisenhower in terms of his philosophy towards spending and taxation. That is, that he's willing to have large programs, but he wants to be able to have them without dramatically ballooning the deficit. And so one of the tasks he gives to his team when they make the decision for the healthcare law is that he doesn't want it to have to increase the deficit. This is a very expensive law, more than $1 trillion, because you're subsidizing health insurance for all of these people who previously lacked it, who are coming into the system. Some of it is paid through increased taxes, mostly on the wealthy, but that's not enough to fund the entire law. Some of it is paid by increased taxes on medical device makers, and the argument is that if more people are insured, more people will be getting coverage. These device makers will be making more money because they'll be able to sell more goods. One of the ironies here is that these device makers are heavily in Democratic states, Massachusetts, Minnesota, and you see Democratic senators from these states, including Elizabeth Warren, who argue for repealing this tax. Because they're looking out for their own constituents. But that's not enough either. So eventually what the Obama team comes up with is a significant reduction, $716 billion over a 5-year period to Medicare spending. Now, this is not taking benefits away from people with Medicare. The $716 billion was lowered payments that Medicare would give to providers. But in the real world, if the providers are getting $716 billion less, is their service likely to decline a little bit? Yes. It is no coincidence that one of the strongest opponents of Obamacare are voters over 65, who basically see this as Obama shifting some of their health care to younger voters who don't have health care but who are part of the Obama coalition. And these people vote, and one of the key reasons why the Republicans take control of Congress in 2010 is that older voters are energized by this aspect. The second is that Obama overpromises his plan in one critical but politically near fatal way. He repeatedly, over and over again, and we're going to listen to this in a second, assures Americans that he's designed this policy in a way that avoids trade-offs, that unlike Hillary Care, where one of the arguments was you would lose your health insurance and you'd be forced into these new health alliances and have to purchase the program there. Obama's argument is that for those who have health insurance and those who are happy with their health insurance, they are all set.
If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor under the reform proposals that we put forward. If you like your private health insurance plan, you can keep it. If you like the plan you have, you can keep it. If you like the doctor you have, you can keep your doctor too. We will keep this promise to the American people. If you like your doctor, you will be able to keep your doctor, period. If you like your health care plan, you will be able to keep your health care plan, period. If you like your doctor, you'll be able to keep your doctor. If you like your health care plan, you'll be able to keep your health care plan. If you've got health insurance, you like your doctor, you like your plan, you can keep your doctor, you can keep your plan. If you like your plan, you can keep your plan. If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor.
It's a powerful argument, again, made over and over and over again. The problem is that it was untrue. So the estimates were somewhere between 2 million and around 5 million people who lost their health insurance plans as a result of Obamacare. So who were these people? They tended to be younger people, self-employed, gig workers, people who didn't get health insurance through their jobs, who purchased health insurance on what was then an open and unregulated market. And basically what they were doing is buying bare bones insurance that may cover like catastrophic illness or something like that, might cover, one trip to the doctor every 2 years. It was not great health insurance that they had, but it tended to be relatively cheap. The Obamacare law, the goal is to get as many healthy people into the insurance system as they can to subsidize the care for those who lacked insurance and had no chance to purchase insurance. And so what it did was to set minimum standards that all insurance plans had to cover. They have to cover like an annual checkup and various procedures, heart surgery, cancer. These be a checklist. And one of the effects of this was that these minimum coverage standards in the law made the cheap plans that these people had. They didn't satisfy the law, so the insurance companies could no longer offer them, and as a result, the insurance company canceled the plan. So this was incredibly problematic for Obama, a candidate who had campaigned on integrity and honesty, repeatedly saying something that was not true. Obama's response to this in the aftermath of these cancellations was, and this is correct, that these people it was still okay for them to get health insurance. In almost all circumstances, they were getting better health insurance, although it was more expensive than their plans were. But that was irrelevant. The fact is, he had repeatedly promised that if you like your plan, you'll keep your plan. These people, at least some of them, liked their plan and did not. So Medicare and the taking money away from Medicare to help pay for the law, and this erroneous statement about the effect of the law on all Americans. These were the two key substantive reasons outside of partisanship that led to objections against the law. Did expelled LGBT military members receive any forms of reparations in the future? The answer to that is no. They were allowed in some circumstances to re-enlist, especially if they've been kicked out in 2009, 2010. But for the most part, the gay and lesbian soldiers who are kicked out under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the country loses their military service. They never come back. They're not entitled to any kind of reparations. This screenshot here is from an organization called Modern Military, which is the successor to a group called Servicemen Legal Defense Network, which was the lead legal entity that battled against Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And this gives you a sense of some of the issues for LGBT members of the military now. So you still have cases where people were kicked out and they're attempting to clean up their service record because you get a dishonorable discharge under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. There are cases of discrimination against gay and lesbian soldiers once Don't Ask, Don't Tell is repealed in 2011, 2012, even 2013. And then there are the two kind of follow-up issues to Don't Ask, Don't Tell. The question of trans military service, which Obama allows in 2016, and then Trump, sort of repeals 18 months or so into its administration. And then the second issue was military members with HIV, which there had been a regulation in the military dating from the 80s that if you had HIV, you would get kicked out of the military automatically. But now, of course, living with HIV is very different than was the case in the 1980s. And so when you have openly gay members who have HIV, will they be kicked out? Will they be not? And that's been challenged. But basically, for those who were kicked out pre-2011, there's no going back. Last question, which is a really interesting one. The winner-take-all system with delegates in the Democratic primary, should that be implemented in the Electoral College? Would it create a better representation of the popular vote? Maine and Nebraska already have that. Indeed, Maine and Nebraska do. They're the only two states that have it. In both states, it has had an impact one time. The way it works in Maine and Nebraska is that the statewide winner gets 2 electoral votes, and then the winner of each congressional district gets 1 electoral vote. And in 2008, Obama very narrowly won the 2nd district of Nebraska, which was Omaha and 1 county to Omaha's north, and as a result, got 1 electoral vote. Maine has 4 electoral votes. In 2016, Hillary narrowly won the state. She had been leading by 10, 11 points in the polls, only won by around 3 points. But basically, Maine's congressional district, one of them is right along the coast in the mid-coast. I'm coming at you from right about here. I'm just south of the town I live in is just south of Portland. This is a pretty liberal, reliably Democratic district, but the remainder of the state, Western Maine, Central Maine, Northern Maine, is a lot of rural, small town, very pro-gun, an area that surprisingly strongly supported Obama, both in 2008 and 2012. There are very few African Americans in this part of Maine, but swung very heavily to Trump in 2016, and the result is that Trump got 1 electoral vote. He carried the 2nd district, which is basically Maine, all of this section of Maine, carried it by around 10 points. For Maine and Nebraska, I think the system works great. I mean, in 2016, I remember when I would be home, there'd be all kinds of ads from Hillary and from Trump. I mean, the national candidates were paying attention to us, a small state, because the race, there was the 1 electoral vote from Northern Maine. Same thing with Nebraskans in 2008, Obama campaigned there, and McCain was advertising there. For bigger states, however, the answer to this question is almost certainly no. And the reason for this, take an example from the 2016 campaign, Pennsylvania, say, 18 House seats, 20 electoral votes. Now, if Pennsylvania used the Maine system, winner of the state gets 2 electoral votes, and then winner of each congressional district gets 1 electoral vote. The split would have been 11 electoral votes for Trump and 9 electoral votes for Hillary, and the result would have been basically the exact same as Maine. And so the result then would have been, if you were Trump, why would you really put in lots of money to Pennsylvania, care about what Pennsylvanians are saying, if the best you're going to get is an extra 2 or 3 electoral votes? So for larger states, the Electoral College winner-take-all system actually is a way to force policymakers to pay attention to your state, as long as the state is competitive. The flaw in this system, of course, is this relatively recent development, in which both California and New York have become overwhelmingly non-competitive in presidential elections. It is entirely possible in the 2020 election that Trump will lose both New York and California by 40 points or more. And while at various points in modern U.S. history, New York has been quite one-sided, Texas has been quite one-sided, there's nothing like this imbalance. And so the issue of a more balanced representation system, and the fact that two of the country's four largest states have just become, democratic sinkholes in terms of in terms of popular votes, is very difficult to reconcile. So that leads to another option, which is this so-called national popular vote option. And so that would create state laws that would, the states would order all of the electors in the states to vote for whoever the candidate was who get the most popular votes. And those laws have passed in a lot of Democratic controlled states. A provision to do that, a bill to do that, was up before the Maine state legislature last year. Opposed completely by Republicans, but opposed by a lot of Democrats too, because what they understood is if the country moved towards a national popular vote, a state like Maine, which is a small state, only 4 electoral votes, under 2 million people, we would get no attention in the national campaign. Candidates would be campaigning in New York and in California and in Ohio and Florida, whereas the Electoral College requires presidential candidates, because we're fairly closely divided politically, to pay attention to us. So this is a recurring theme in this class. The people for whom, or in this case, the states for whom the status quo benefits, are going to fight as hard as they can to retain the benefits of the status quo, which will make changing things extremely difficult in this regard. So that's about all that we have for this week. I hope everyone is staying safe, and I will talk to you soon. Okay, bye.